for joining again.
Hey.
So this is the first one in the New Year's. So Happy New Year's to everyone joining us from all over the world. It is awesome to be back on our regular series of scope workshops that we'll be running in this year as well. So today, again, I'm joined by Yondan, and we are going to do a couple of things. We will talk again about scope, of course. This will be a good opportunity for you to ask your questions. You can ask them either directly on YouTube or X or in Discord. There is this little QR code up at the up at the top of the screen. So feel free to scan that QR code, and you should be able to be you should be dropped to our Discord server where you can ask your questions, and we will do our best to get to most of them, if not all of them, during this session. So a couple of things before we move on. As I said, again, we are talking about scope today. We will discuss VACE, and we will also discuss some of the improvements and changes that we made recently. Yondan is the right person to do that. I would encourage everyone, especially the people who are joining us for the first time, to go and check out our GitHub repo. If you like it, you can also give it a star. Check out the docs that we have there and try run it and explore it on your side as well. I think it should be quite valuable for everyone. And also there is our Discord page, our Discord server, where we're having a really nice community answering all your questions and supporting each other. Right now, we are also running our AI video program, basically a hackathon that was running through this holiday season. We will be having it again in a couple of weeks' time. So I would like to welcome and give my best to the people from that cohort that are joining this event. And we will talk about the future intakes on some of the future events that we'll be having. So that will also be a good opportunity for everyone to join and build with scope. So without any further ado, Yondan, the floor is yours. Can you tell us what's the new that we've built and delivered in scope recently? I know that we have now desktop app, but we also built this entire integration with VACE. I know it's experimental. We always say it's experimental and in beta, but what does that mean and what do we currently support and what's on the roadmap? You want to take us straight?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with a couple words and then we can move into, well, just for clarity, at what point does my screen start getting shared, or is it already? Okay, so I can see it now.
You can say it, yeah.
Actually, I'll just use this to walk through the first part. So I'll talk a little bit about what's been happening in recent releases. I'll go through a couple demos of some of the things that I've talked about, and then can also talk about what's upcoming. So, and Vibber, feel free to kind of chime in whenever. We can have this be fluid and have it go in any particular direction, but I'll generally follow that format, if that sounds good to you.
Sounds awesome. Let's do it.
All right, so I think since the last time that we had a workshop, there have been a couple things that have happened. Number one, we moved scope from alpha to beta stage. You know, the TLDR of what this means for the average person is that, as some people know, we kind of have just been evolving and iterating on scope in public over time. And it was marked as alpha, mainly because we weren't really quite sure at the very beginning what direction that we wanted to take it. And we decided to move it into beta because it feels like we have a better sense of what it would mean to get to an initial stable release of scope, hence moving into beta. And the first beta release, and I would say the thing that kind of marks things symbolically as beta for us, is we released the first version of the desktop app. So prior to the first beta release, the only way to use scope was you use the CLI, you use Git, you have to kind of download everything yourself, be comfortable in the terminal. And the desktop app is basically a packaged up version of all of this, so that if you're on Windows and you have a local GPU, you can kind of go through this streamlined installation process. So I would say that was, you know, the big thing that marked the first version of beta. In addition to that, some of the things that we've landed in the last couple of weeks throughout the holiday break was, as Vibber mentioned, experimental support for VACE. Some of you might be familiar with VACE, some of you might not be. VACE stands for All-in-One Video Creation and Editing, and you can think of this as an extension to the original WAN and LTX and other video generation models. This came out last year. And what it allowed us to do is for these video models, you could start adding more control. So this preview on the VACE page shows you what this would look like using a normal video generation model. What was unclear was, could you get something like that to work with these autoregressive, meaning predicting frame by frame video models that we've been focused on in scope? Initially, this didn't seem possible, but it turns out with some modifications, we can support it. So as of the first beta release, we actually launched experimental support for VACE, a modified version of VACE. And we marked it as experimental for now because we're still ironing out a lot of the kinks, getting a better understanding of how it works and interacts with these new models. But the primary two things that were included was reference images and control videos. So I can show those in a moment. But the reason that we didn't mark this as complete is because there's a lot that is a part of the VACE suite of tools. And we definitely want to start incorporating more of them, but they require additional work. So we wanted to start off with something which is reference images and control videos. So maybe I'll start by showing that. Does that sound good, Bibber?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, so I'm going to hop over to this window. So this is a local instance of Scope that I'm running. And you'll see over here that there is this VACE enabled toggle. If we click it on and off, it'll bring up this reference images component over here. So the first thing we'll go through, and I'll demonstrate this with LongLive, but it should work with any of the models except for Kriya, which we'll be adding support for soon. But I'll just show it with LongLive. So I have here VACE enabled. And what I'll do is select a reference image. Well, first, why don't we see what this looks like without a reference image, right? And that can give us a good comparison. So this will take a little bit to load. But basically, the way that reference images work are that you're able to tell the model, hey, use this as a visual reference point as you start your generation and incorporate this into the frames that you're spitting out on the other side. So this is what the kind of baseline video looks like. So the prompt is a 3D animated scene. A panda walks along a path towards a camera in a park on a spring day. So no additional VACE usage. Let's reset it. And I have a couple images here. So why don't we use this one? So this is going to be my reference image. And we're going to use this to basically steer the first couple frames of the generation and see what happens. Take a
Those
minute.
images are like pre-built ones, right? We are shipping now Scope with a couple of those images prepared for users.
So these are not shipped with Scope. These are just like random images off the web that I pulled down. But
Okay.
okay, so you can see here, this is the updated video output when I use this reference image. And you can see that the influence of the reference image is shown in the video as it continues. So we still have, I mean, I guess the prompt and the reference image clash a little bit. Like what would a scene look like if you had this girl, this animated girl, and it was actually a prompt with a panda, right? So there's this clash here, and this is how the model interprets it. But we could also change it. And what would this look like if it is a 3D video game female character walking along a path? So we'll use this prompt instead, and we can see how that prompt interacts with the reference image. So a little bit better now, because there's actually alignment between the prompt and the reference image. So it makes a little bit more sense as opposed to morphing Jinx over here into a panda.
Yeah.
And this works okay, but it's worth noting that all of these features are kind of compatible with existing features. So we'll clear things. We can, coincidentally, because I love using this example, it's my default example, we also have a LoRa specifically for the style of Arcane. So we can actually use that LoRa in order to provide more consistent styling and combine that with a reference image so that when we start streaming the generation, we start with this character using a style that is then enforced more strongly using the LoRa. So it's just an additional way to strengthen the influence of the additional inputs that you're providing. So we'll have to reload some stuff. This will take a little bit, but what we should see is the first scene starting with the reference image. And then relative to what I just showed, more consistent stylistic output going forward, but still based off of this initial reference image.
Okay, it's there.
So hopefully you should be able to tell, but I'll pause here. The style you should be able to notice is sharper. It's more defined. And if we let it play, it stays more consistent with the original style relative to previously. There was this kind of fading effect that was happening over time. So the colors were weakening. And this will still happen with some of these models because they still need improvements on the capability front. But hopefully you should be able to notice that the output is more consistent when you use the LoRa than when you don't. So one option is you can always provide a reference image and try to have the model be guided by the reference image. But if you need stronger results and more strong style consistency, that's when you can reach for a LoRa. So let me pause there. That is a quick demonstration of reference images. And that's like the first of the two major VACE features that we included in the first beta release. And happy to kind of answer any questions or address any comments before moving on to the second one.
There's one that we've already gotten, and that was the question is, will scope be getting WAN ATI, like the any trajectory instruction support? Is that something that we plan on doing?
So I think the best way to answer is I don't know if we will specifically have WAN ATI specifically. However, more generally, WAN ATI is all about movement and motion trajectories, right? And there are a number of different ways to incorporate motion trajectories. So we probably won't say do WAN ATI specifically, but we are looking into ways that we can incorporate real-time motion trajectories as a way to guide video going forward. So I think there are two options that we'll probably consider, and we are considering. One, some people might be familiar with a model that wasn't released, but there was a paper released at the end of last year called Motion Stream. And one way to think about Motion Stream, what they demonstrated was real-time motion trajectories similar to WAN ATI. And they had a specific way of accomplishing that. No model release, but it is possible. So that's one thing that we're looking at. Another thing that we're looking at, more along the lines of VACE, is that the original version of VACE, do they show this on the project page? The original version of VACE supports a number of different animation tasks, and one of them is this movement to anything, move anything task. And it actually uses some of the underlying techniques and features of VACE in order to accomplish this. So if you see in this box, you can see that the way that you create a motion trajectory is you use this layout where it's just a simple box that moves along a certain axis, and then you can guide the video that way. So this probably will not be as maybe performant or maybe even high quality as the motion stream approach, but it will be much faster to implement. So I think generally we're going to look at both options. But the general goal that we'll have is 100%, there will be motion trajectories that you can incorporate in both the UI and API. And we're going to look at both approaches. But I suspect we'll have something working with the first one, or this kind of VACE-like approach first. And then we'll probably optimize with something like the motion stream approach later on. But yeah, 100%, that's something that we would want to incorporate.
Awesome. Thanks for covering that one. I want to just to backtrack a little for a second. So you said that currently we are supporting only one 2.1, 1.3b based pipelines, right? And that in our case is currently long live, reward forcing, memflow, but also stream diffusion v2. But we do suggest actually for users to use long live because the quality with stream diffusion v2 is a little bit off compared to long live. Is that still the case? Or we made some changes on that side.
So that's still the case.
Hmm.
If you're using VACE right now, would not recommend using Stream Diffusion v2 with it. You can certainly try, it works, but we haven't seen as good results with that just quite yet. So long live is probably still a safe default. We recently introduced this other model, memflow,
Hmm.
and memflow is based off of long live. And according to the paper, it improves on some aspects of long live in terms of prompt adherence. So we can just take a look at what that looks like right now. Let me download this timeline file and we can just take a look at what that looks like.
That's good.
So this will take a little bit to load. But I think, it's one thing for the paper to say that, it's another thing in actual usage to validate that in practice. So that's why long live is still the default, because most people are used to using that. But I would say memflow is worth checking out. And in early testing, it does seem it improves on prompt adherence relative to long live, at least in the tests that we've done. So what we show here is this simple prompt sequence where the beekeeper has a boy appear next to her. And maybe I can try the same thing with, let's see, what's a good way to do this? Let's
You want to
put
do
them.
like a comparison of the
Yeah,
same? Mm-hmm.
I was just going to do a quick comparison. Unfortunately, we don't have the simplest way to do this right now besides editing this file. So I'm going to edit this real quick. Okay, so I made an update. Let's refresh. Let's re-import that. Okay, so now it's using long live, but it's the same prompt sequence. So let's see
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like. In my earlier testing, what I noticed, and I'm curious if this will show up in this test, was that long live would make two boys appear instead of
Mm.
one. But let's see.
I remember you posted, right, like a little strip of those in our Discord. And again, there's a QR code for people to join our Discord. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there we go.
Twins now.
Yeah, so interestingly, you actually ended up with two boys instead of one. And this was actually a really consistent, that was consistent across the tests that I was doing, where I did a comparison between, um, maybe I can pull it up. Actually, no, I don't have it immediately available. But it was a comparison between reward forcing, long live, and memflow. And what seemed consistent with those sample prompt sequences was that memflow would consistently only introduce one character, as described in the prompt, but the other two models would sometimes introduce two characters, likely because they got a little bit confused about historical context and the fact that a previous prompt only introduced one character, so they thought they should
Mm-hmm.
introduce two. So, obviously these are a small set of tests, but I think early indication is that it does improve a little bit on prompt adherence. But people should try it out and see how this works for them.
If there is like a one simplest way that how would you describe memflow compare, relative to other pipelines that we have here, the biggest change, what it introduced compared to long live or maybe some of the other pipelines? Is it this
Yes.
temporal consistency, better adherence to prompts, or something in between?
So I would say the two focus areas for memflow at a high level were how do you improve consistency with prompts while remaining consistent with what you've already seen, right? So if you've already introduced one character, you should make sure that you remember that you already introduced that character and you don't reintroduce them given a prompt. But you also want to make sure that you adhere to the prompt properly. So those were like the two focuses of the MemFlow paper. And the way they accomplished this or made an improvement, it's definitely not a silver bullet, but the way that what they put out was basically trying to be smarter about how the model manages its memory. Because these models, some people might be already aware of this, and this is overly simplified, but I think the way to think about it is that these autoregressive video models, the way that they work is that they predict the next frame based on their memory of what's already been predicted previously. So there's always this question of which parts of memory do you rely on? And a lot of the research that has been happening in recent months has been trying to answer this question of, given these goals of coherence across time and also adherence to prompts, what's the right way to kind of pick what to rely on in your memory when you predict the next frame? So with MemFlow, they basically introduced a specific strategy that tries to be smarter about which of the previous frames that it produced it relies on when a prompt change happens. And the way that this works under the hood roughly maps to, like, when you get a new prompt, the model basically tries to go through its memory and find, hey, what were the previous frames that would actually be most relevant to this new prompt and where I've already been, as opposed to looking through its entire memory, which would be the default. So the default would be, hey, I created like 50 frames. Let me just hold them all in my head at once and try to think about what's next. That's sort of the default. And then you forget over time. But these new strategies, like the one that MemFlow introduced, says, hey, don't even bother holding everything into your head. We actually have a smarter strategy for saying only keep things related to, say, the first couple of frames and frames that are most likely to be related to this new prompt semantically, and only hold those in your head. And it turns out that it does have some improvements. There's probably a lot more improvements that can be made, though, because there are other strategies out there. And that's what a lot of the research is doing, how to effectively handle this. Because, similar to humans, well, we don't have infinite compute. These models can't hold everything in the world in their head just quite yet.
Not quite yet. Yeah, that's the important part. Yeah. Awesome. There was someone mentioning that you have incredible typing skills, and I noticed that when you were typing the prompt for this one, it almost felt like you were copy pasting it. So your words per second is your words per second game is pretty tough. So someone on Discord actually mentioned that one, so sharing that with you. All
Okay,
right.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Do you wanna go forward and show us what else do we have?
Yeah, let's do that. So, okay, so we just went through reference images. So that was like the first of the major VACE features that was released. The second is, people call this by different names. We refer to this as either VACE video to video or using control videos with VACE. So what that means is, let's switch over to video mode. And we have to enable VACE. And we're going to say use input video. So let me see. Let me go to the VACE guide. So if you have been around AI video generation, you've probably seen videos that look like this, right? For some people, this is very clear what it is. Some people, it might be foreign. I'll just say this for the foreign people. This is specifically an open pose video. And an open pose video, we generally categorize as a control video. Open pose specifically is a format for representing kind of rough skeletal motion of a figure. So that's why you can imagine that there's an actual person here, but all that we care about are like a rough sketch of how their joints are moving. Because this is like a simplified representation of motion and body movement. This is one type of control video, but we also have other ones. There's also depth videos, scribble videos, optical flow videos. I won't go through all of those immediately, but the way to think about these is that instead of using a video that has like full information, like the video that is shown on the screen of us right now, we can give like a condensed, simplified representation that just shows what we care about most and use it to guide the model. So that's why we say it's a control video. It's mainly about controlling like a very specific aspect of the video. Let's say it's motion, let's say it's depth, like how far certain pixels are away from the screen or close to the screen. Or it could be optical flow. So optical flow is like, what's the relative motion of pixels across time? So you can get a sense of how things are visually changing. So all of those are like control videos that guide the model. And we have in our VACE guide an example that you can walk through, but I'll just go through it right now. So I'll actually download this control video, and we can click this upload button, upload the control video here. We're going to output at height 480, width 832. Maybe let's use 3 denoising steps. And
be mindful of our performances. Yep.
Yeah, let's say a woman dancing. And we'll let that load for a little bit. So what we should see is, there we go. So in this case, what you should be able to tell here, this is running at a slightly lower frame rate, only 6 frames per second. But the motion and the body composition roughly aligns with the skeletal motion of this open pose video. And we can prompt it as per usual. For some reason, the model thinks that they should be holding what looks like flashlights. So that's a prompt skill issue that probably can fix things. But yeah, the basic idea is now you can use this control video to guide what's happening in the output and say, hey, pay attention to the movement in this specific movement and use that to guide your generation. So this is with open pose. I think I have one of depth as well. So open pose is one example. This is a depth video. So the white pixels indicate closer to the screen or camera, and the black pixels indicate farther away. So this allows us to understand like 3D spatial depth within a 2D video. So yeah, let's try that. This should work as well. So once again, you get actual motion here based off of the original input.
Couple of questions. So how do we generate those open pose and these depth video maps that we could use for this? Are there some specific tools, something that works well based on your experience, or they can just be found all over the place?
So these videos, they can be found and they can be generated with a number of tools because they're pretty common formats. But probably the easiest one that's most accessible to people because it's free is that you could use Comfy UI in order to generate these videos. And Comfy UI has, I think, these custom nodes called Comfy UI ControlNet aux, because this was originally created for ControlNet workflows. It's pretty popular on GitHub, 3.7K stars. So this is something that you can, if you have Comfy UI installed, you can install these nodes, and then it allows you to input videos and then create output videos that look like this. Then these output videos can be imported into Scope, as I just did, and you could basically replicate this type of workflow. So that's the easiest way to do things right now, given the current release. Understandably, that's a pain, right? And in a lot of cases, you don't want to like go use a separate tool and figure out how to do this. Something that we are working on that will probably be able to release, will probably land on main this week, and then we'll incorporate into a release next week, is basically additional preprocessor pipelines within Scope. So instead of generating this depth video yourself, you can just say, generate the depth for me in real time, and then send those depth images to the model to basically replicate the same output. So instead of having to upload this file separately, you could just upload a normal video of, let's say, a woman dancing, and then all of this can be handled for you under the hood. That's not ready yet, but it is something that we're working on, and we'll probably have a version of that, at least for depth, later this week, and then it'll be out in a release next week.
Okay, that's pretty cool. You mentioned, and then this was asked earlier, you mentioned the concept of control nets, right? And how would you pull a parallel? And I know that in our playground, for example, for the Daydream API with the Stable Diffusion, the previous versions, there is an ability to change and work with the control nets. How would you pull the parallel between control nets and the open pose and these depth videos? Are they related conceptually, and in which way?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the best way to think about it is these control videos, whether it be
Hmm.
depth, open pose, optical flow, I would bucket them all into, people have different names for them, but I'll call them control signals or control videos. So each of those are formats in their own right. And even before any of this generative AI stuff, those were staples in both the video, animation, and 3D industries. People were using depth videos, open post videos, etc. So that's in its own category. The next category is the set of techniques that someone can use in order to use those control signals and control videos to guide a generative AI model, usually a diffusion model. And there are many different techniques for that. The most popular one from image generation days was ControlNet, because ControlNet introduced this specific way where you could take an existing image generation model and basically slap on some modifications to it. And then all of a sudden, it can accept these control signals and control videos. It came with its own set of trade-offs, but it was very popular, continues to be very popular. VACE is another technique that also introduces the ability to understand these control signals and control videos, but it goes about it slightly differently at the technical architecture level. And it was designed specifically also for video generation models as opposed to image
Hmm.
generation models. So they all kind of end up trying to accomplish the same thing, but depending on the modality, i.e. image versus video, or depending on the kind of end requirements, one technique might make more sense than the other. But the end goal is always, it is pretty much the same, which is like we have these existing control videos that convey this useful condensed information about what to pay attention to. How can you translate that into actual guidance for one of these models so they understand it?
Got it. Okay, cool. That's a really good explanation. So now we covered basically reference to video and video to video. There is one concept, and I think that you mentioned it also in our docs. It's called animate anything. So is that basically just a combination of the R2V and VACE V2V, or there is something else? What do we like? What do we entail? What do we consider when we talk about animate anything?
Yeah, so we talk about this more in the VACE guide in the docs, but you
Yeah.
were basically right. This is just R2D, reference to video, combined with VACE video to video. In other words, combining reference images with control videos. And the reason that this is called animate anything, we're just reusing terminology from the original VACE. Uh, for background, the intent behind VACE was to try to kind of create these base level tasks that could then be combined together for more complex tasks. And what they showed in their project page was that, well, it turns out that if you have a baseline of reference images, control videos, and then the third one, which is something that we haven't really introduced to folks yet, but is a VACE concept, is masking. So masking would be, you can see in these two videos, there's a gray blob masking this cat, or there's a gray blob masking the rider of the horse. We could think of it as the model is going to see a bunch of pixels, and you could selectively circle certain areas and basically be like, this area is a point of interest, either to not care about or to care a lot about. So more on that in a moment. But the idea was with these three tasks, you could combine them in different ways. And one of them is animate anything. And animate anything is basically saying you can take a reference image and a control video, and you could basically animate the control signal using the reference image. So we can take a look at that, what that looks like concretely. So let's go back to, let's see how well this works. So we'll go back to this open pose video, and we'll go back to this reference image, and we'll stick with this prompt, a woman dancing, and let's see where we end up.
No flashlights.
No flashlights. So, what's interesting here is that we pick up some of the stylistic elements from the reference image. We're guided by the motion of the control video, but you can tell like it's not the same character, right? So character consistency still can need some work. But basically, it does illustrate we can follow the motion of the control video. We can give stylistic guidance with the reference image. And then kind of the last thing that is missing here, or that needs more work, is character and identity consistency. There are, a few ways that you could do this. One of them is we could try using Allura again. And because we happen to have Allura with the visual style that we want, this should help. But there are other ways to do this as well. They just are not supported in scope right now. But I would say if you care about character consistency and you want to try this type of animate anything workflow, the starting point would be do the control video and the reference image. And if you need more, try out the LoRa path as well. So here we go.
Oh, okay. So obviously much more closer to a reference image.
Yeah, so this is a little bit better where it looks a little bit closer to the reference image. It's helped by the LoRa. We still follow the original motion. It's still using the same rough background and starting point of the reference image. And that's just some of the ways that you can combine this together in this quote unquote animate anything task.
Okay. This is pretty insightful. Again, I would invite everyone, if you guys have any questions, either if you're watching us on YouTube, on X, or on Discord, feel free to type them, and we'll make sure to cover them and answer them for you. But yeah, this is pretty cool. So you can literally, depending on the amount of consistency that you're aiming for, you can keep adding different layers and improving it as you go along. One of the questions that we've gotten before is, when is this dropping as an AI support? When it is going to be accessible through, sorry, not AI, API, through APIs? Currently, Scope does have APIs, and we support a bunch of things. Any plans for VACE, or we already have that? What's the current situation?
Yeah, so if you go to the Scope repo, I think this was last week or the week before, we did add an API section. So if you click here, this is documentation for using the Scope API directly. So what you just saw in the UI is using this same API under the hood. So anyone can also directly use this API. And we have some documentation with quick start here. For VACE specifically, if you go to workflows, there is a dedicated section about using VACE with the API. It includes a section about uploading reference images, setting reference images, parameters, using control videos, and we'll continue to update this as we add more VACE-related features as well. But this is probably the best starting point if you want to start using VACE via the API directly.
Oh, this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool. I'm kind of connecting it with a bunch of use cases that I've seen in the our hacker program, right? Where people were expanding and using APIs and using scope as a part of their broader workflows. I'm assuming that this extensibility will allow even richer use cases for the production and for steerability of the content that they're creating. Uh, Other, going way beyond just pure prompting and hoping for the best result, right?
Yeah, exactly. The whole idea, and VACE is just one of the solutions here. And the reason that we've added it is because I think the goal here is to give people more tools for control. But the intent behind VACE is, instead of treating everything as just a random dice roll, you actually can selectively control what changes, what doesn't, use references, and basically have additional ways to guide the model. So it's not just like yelling at the model over text and hoping it does what you want it to do. You can still do that, of course, but now you can do that alongside some of these other techniques. And it's more of it feels more of like a creative suite as opposed to, just a single box that you type in and hope that it does what you want it to do. So that's the intent.
That's pretty cool. Another question. Are we getting multiple reference images down the road?
Yes, it's not supported right now, likely because of an implementation issue, but that's on the roadmap too. Yeah, so some of the things that are not included are, we don't support these full suite of tasks. We've only just showed animate anything, but there's other things that you could do. And then obviously, I think it goes without saying, but I'll repeat it. But this stuff is cool, but we want to be able to do all this stuff in real time. So it could be one continuous interactive, almost like canvas, like the video becomes a canvas for you that you work with fluidly. So right now it's really just animate anything, but we want to do the move anything stuff and all this other stuff. And it remains to be seen, how well, because as something to remember, a lot of this is applicable and with these models, some of it may not be. So we'll kind of try to eke out all the stuff that you can do with VACE since it's already implemented. But then if it doesn't work with it, we'll still focus on those tasks. We'll just use different techniques for them.
You mentioned a couple of these things, but for example, I know that there is also the ability for swap anything and extend anything. Would that follow pretty much the same pattern of implementation that we have here? Do we have any immediate plans for supporting that, and what kind of scenarios would that enable? So, for example, swap anything, would that mean that you could change the character, or what would be the typical use case of something like that?
Yeah, so a lot of it will come down to masking. So if you remember that the 3 pillars of VACE were, what was it? Reference images, control videos, and masking. And masking, if you recall, is all about telling the model what pixels to pay more attention to or pay less attention to, or almost like taking a shroud and hiding some stuff from the model and forcing it to not pay attention to it. So for something like swap anything, one way to think about it is if I masked this character over here and then said replace this character, I could basically replace this character in real time with a different character. So where's swap anything? I think this is probably best exemplified as, yeah, this one, where in the video you can, it's masking this character on the right, and the swap anything is basically replacing it with this reference image, this cat.
With that cat, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think you can start to see how these things fit together because the reference image tells you what you replace the masked object or character with, right? So the reference image is needed for that. The mask is needed to tell the model, hey, focus exclusively on this and don't pay attention to anything else. And those two things together allow you to do this type of swap anything workflow. Another way to think about this is it's a form of like in-painting. Um,
True. Yeah.
so in-painting generally refers to like if you don't know what the pixels in this region should look like, previously you had all these algorithms to try to predict, what pixels should go there. And then in-painting with these AI models is, well, the AI models can be a little bit smarter about what pixels to put there. So you paint it quote unquote in. And then out-painting is just the reverse, where um, you need to paint the outer regions of what is not shown in a particular scene. So that's another way to think about this. And this stuff works internally in the pipeline stuff. We just have not added it in the API and the UI yet. But all that is
Mhm.
coming as well.
Awesome. Super, super nice to hear that we are planning on building that. One thing that keeps popping up in question is, so now users have a couple of options on how to run Scope, right? So they can run it in the cloud with RunPod. They can also run it as a Windows application if they have hardware for that, or they can build from the source. The question is, are we getting or are we going to have Scope running on Daydream network, on Live network at some point? Do we have
Yeah.
any plans around that?
So I think the best way to think about that is um, I think there are folks that are going to be working on that. Like Scope today is it's a couple things, right? It
Mhm.
is, I think the best way to think about it is that it is a single tool for customizing and running these real-time AI models. And what comes with that is if you just want a full-fledged application, you use the desktop application, run everything locally, but you can also self-host the server and use the UI with a remote server. So because it's self-hostable, the idea here is that people can use it locally, but anyone can also self-host that. And I think one of the efforts that people are spending time on is kind of using this at the infrastructure layer so that people don't have to like host this on RunPod themselves. So you can create like a hosted version of this. And I know folks are working on that. I can't kind of give timelines on that because that's like not my main prerogative right now. But there are active efforts for doing that because the way that this is meant to be, the way that this is designed is so that you can do that. You can run it locally in a fully encapsulated way, but you can also host it in that way as well. And I think using it on the live peer network in that way is one of the desired outcomes as well.
Awesome. And one other thing, I'm just checking through the chat. Cosmic Crafter mentioned that earlier during this session you mentioned Comfy UI, but he also said that Pinocchio has a good amount of AI tools that are very user friendly. If Comfy UI feels scary for some of the users and people. So have you ever played with Pinocchio Island? Do you have any experience with it? How would you compare it?
I've heard of Pinocchio. I haven't used it myself.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think as I mentioned before, there are many different ways that you can generate these videos. I mentioned CompUI only because I'm familiar with it, but
Yeah.
understandably, it can be a little bit intimidating for folks. So I think something like Pinocchio could work well as well. Um, so if folks have resources about that, do share with everyone because I think the easier the better. Um, and yeah, we'll also work on kind of just making this work in real time within scope as well. So there'll be a couple options for you.
Awesome. I don't have any questions right now. Is there anything else, Jan, that you would like to go and cover, or something outstanding that I forgot to mention or you forgot to mention so far?
Maybe one thing that I'll just show real quick since it's top of mind. This will be included in a release probably tomorrow. Um, we're generally trying to keep up this like weekly release cadence so that folks have like new stuff to play with on a week to week basis. We recently added support for some speed ups. This has to do with this is like a broader effort, but the thing that landed is there's now this VAE tab. So for folks that are familiar with VAEs, you can think of this as just like the part of all the AI processing that actually translate this like numerical latent representation into actual pixels on your screen. But oftentimes it can be kind of slow. So we basically added support for some new open source versions that are a bit faster. So well, I wonder what it'll look like with this. I actually haven't tried it. So if there's a bug right
Okay.
now, I'm going to regret showing this. But the basic idea is there's a few options, and they have different, I think, where is it? You can look at the API documentation, but they have different trade-offs in terms of quality and speed. So the one that I'm going to show here prioritizes speed, but sacrifices a little bit of quality. So this still works, right? But now I wish I had kind of like captured this earlier, but we're running at 480p, we're running at like 13.4 FPS. But before we were running at closer to, I want to say like 7 or 8, definitely sub 10. The visual fidelity, a little bit of is sacrificed, you might be able to notice, but we kind of make up for it in terms of speed. So hoping that this can be useful for people as they play around with quality and speed trade-offs. And this is something that is configurable via this VAE component in the UI, but also directly via the API. So if you go to the VAE type section, it'll show you examples of how you can toggle between each of these and how to think about the trade-offs between each of them. The default is still the original one, which is this one VAE, which has the best quality but slowest speed. We've seemed to have gotten pretty good results with either the light VAE or the light TAE, but your mileage may vary, so encourage people to try it out for themselves. But that's the only other bit. This is live on main, and if you're building from source, and if you want to wait until this is ready in a release, i.e. in the desktop app, you can wait for tomorrow.
Well, we're on a pretty tight release cycle, so pretty much all the changes are coming out pretty rapidly, I would say. But yeah, there might be some people who want to build from source and just start playing around with it right away. There was one question. If someone wants to run this on Rumpad and not using the template that already exists there, if they want to do it almost like from the scratch, we have a Docker image. But what would be the use case for something like that? How they go about it? Because I know that when you go to Rumpad, you can select that. I think there is like a PyTorch. There is a bunch of different images that exist. Um, what would you recommend to someone if they don't want to use our template and they just want to do it from the scratch on Rumpad?
Yeah, so I think the use case for that is, I think the run pod template is best if all that you care about is running scope, like as is.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not planning on making any changes, and that's all that you want, and you can't run it locally. The downside of the run pod template approach is that if you do want to make changes, it's not really conducive for that. Because if you want to make changes, like you're actually someone that's comfortable getting into the code, you want to be able to modify the changes and then restart scope and then see those changes take place. So it's a little bit tricky to do that with the run pod template. There are workarounds, but it's not that straightforward. So I think the use case for what you just described is if you want to make changes on like a remote cloud instance with a GPU.
Mm-hmm.
So you can totally do that with run pod. I think the best way to do that would be spin up a run pod that, I'll just go to the docs. So I actually think you could, so if you go to, where's run pod? So if you go to the run pod section, instead of clicking the run pod template link, just go directly to the run pod page and don't use the template.
But select the image from there or what?
But just follow the rest of the instructions,
Mm-hmm.
and then just clone the scope repo after you SSH into the run pod instance.
Oh, exactly. Use it as literally as a remote machine that you then, clone the repo to and then run it, install dependencies and everything else.
Exactly.
Okay. That will probably solve the issue. That was actually a question from one of the cohort participants in a slightly different way, but I just wanted to cover it like this. Okay, that's awesome. That gives you a full flexibility. Then whatever you make, whichever change you actually make to your repo, push that change. You can run it, and it should be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Now we get the racket, not just the flashlights and wings and whatnot.
This is kind of demented, but I guess this is the fun of some of these models. You just type stuff in and you're not sure. This is not an apple, but sure.
Yeah, you never know what you're gonna get.
Oh.
Oh wow.
So this is almost definitely not the right configuration for this, but you get the idea.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think we are right on time. Yandon, as always, thank you so much for joining the show and for showing us ways and everything that we are doing. I'm very excited about seeing all the future and plan changes landing soon, and we'll meet likely next week with some interesting topics as well, maybe some guests on the show. Everyone who joined the show, thank you so much. Thank you for asking questions. Again, join our Discord. Stay up to date with our news and updates. We will be running a new cohort very soon. And as always, keep creating with scope and see you soon. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Take care.